Okay, a review. Yesterday we did on Monday our personal journey, my wife and I, and the end of life as we know it, grid down dangers, counsel on leaving the cities from the spirit of prophecy, and ways that people in the city on the 10th floor garden. Today we're going to look at alternatives to the grids on which we depend, which are food, power, water, heat, financial, information, and medical. And basically anything you take your wallet out for to spend money on, what would you do if you couldn't spend the money? Either the money is no good or you can't get it, like when we saw in COVID with the empty shelves. I've been told by people after the war in Europe, they had money, but they couldn't buy anything because there wasn't anything to buy. So it can be either way. So let's look first at the food grid. Because our counsel that we read from the Spirit of Prophecy, one of the reasons to move in the country is because you want to be able to grow a garden, because the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. Which means if you are living in the city and you don't know how to garden, or even if you have a garden and you're in the city, you're probably going to be in trouble because your neighbors will steal your food and so forth. So I'm not the gardener. My wife in the back is the gardener. I'm the fence builder. I build the greenhouse. I build the solar. I build the fences. Do the irrigation. But I'm not a green thumb. And so what I'm going to share with you is 3 well-known methods of gardening that 2 of the 3 are Adventists. The first one is Mittlighter method. Have any of you heard of that? Mittlighter was a gentleman that lived in Loma Linda area, and he was a gardener. He did it commercially, and Loma Linda University had him travel the world to try to figure out how countries where they didn't have enough food could provide enough food for them to sustain themselves. And the basic principle that he came away with was concentrate the produce together. Our typical way of gardening is we plant a row of corn, and then you rototill, and then you plant a row of corn, and then you rototill, and the reason you rototill in between is to keep the weeds down. And what he does is he crams the vegetables together so close it can't have the weeds for the most part. And then you have a path to walk on, and in this picture, these are raised beds. And you'll see how everything's just jammed together. They're not in rows. They're just solid. Now, soil can't sustain that kind of dense growth usually. So what he does in his system is he adds nutrients in through the water so that it gets an extra boost. So anyway, this is one picture of a garden in the Mittlighter method. Here's another one. This appears to be tomatoes in the back. They're really tall. And then whatever this is in the front, but you can't hardly see the ground because it's so concentrated. If this interests you, there is by the way, Mittlighter, he died, but he became friends with a Mormon guy who, the Mormon guy in Salt Lake City, meantime, Mittlighter's at Loma Linda, they became friends, and this guy used the Mittlighter method and had this whole thing. I think it was by a park, and he would do all this gardening, and so Mittlighter was his hero. Well, when Mittlighter retired, for some reason, he moved to Salt Lake City and ended up living right near this guy. So they became really good friends, and up until the point at which Mittlighter passed away, they were collaborating on some projects. So this gentleman has taken over his method. That's where you would buy the books or training, or I've been to his seminar, and I'm proud of him because when he tells the history of Mittlighter, he talks about him being a Seventh-day Adventist, even though Mittlighter's dead and this guy is, carrying on the legacy. He's not calling it his own. So anyway, they have a Mittlighter course. It's in a book. I'm sure they have DVDs and stuff too. Just note how Mittlighter is spelled. Now, the one I want to concentrate on is the Ellen White method. How many of you have heard about that? This is primarily for larger plants. This isn't raising radishes. This is trees, tomatoes, grapes, things that are deep rooted. And this gentleman here is standing next to two trees that were planted at the same time, and I have a video clip to show you. And they're 6 years old. The one on your right was planted the Forest Service method, and the one on the left was the Ellen White method. Now here's the background. I find it pretty interesting. Ellen White spent 9 years of her life in Australia from 1891 to 1900. Honestly, the church sent her to get rid of her, put her out to pasture. But God had a plan for her, and so she was helping to develop the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the South Pacific region, and in particular the establishment of Avondale School for Christian Workers, later named Avondale College. During those years in Australia, she wrote the book Desire of Ages. According to Milton Raymond Hook of Andrews University in 1978, Avondale was established in 1894, but the search was a lengthy process. One of the potential properties was Lakeland Estates, which was deep chocolate-colored soil, but it was too expensive. The Brettville Estates soil was sampled and considered poor and sour. When we were investigating the land, Ellen White is saying, on Corenberg, our brethren held off from purchasing for a whole year, thinking to find some other locality that would compare well to the rich soil of Iowa. This they found decidedly could not be found, but the work was hindered for a whole year because of some of the brethren not having the faith to move forward in spite of the discouraging appearances. Then Ellen White says, in the night season, a representation was given to me that revealed this lack of faith. I seemed to be on the Avondale land, and while the horses were breaking through the forest, I walked in an open space close to where the school buildings now stand. I saw a furrow made in the soil about a foot deep and about 4 feet in length. I think she meant width. Two of the brethren stood on the furrow, one on each end, and they were examining the soil. They declared it was of no value. But one stood by who said, "You have misjudged the worth of this land." He then explained the value of the different strata of the soil and their uses. When we came to Avondale to examine the estate, I went with the brethren to the tract of land. After a time we came to the place I had dreamed of, and there was a furrow that I had seen. The brethren looked at it in surprise. How had it come to be there? They asked. Then I told them of the dream that I'd had. Well, they replied, you can see the soil is not good. That, I answered, was the testimony borne by the men in the dream. Now that was given as the reason why they should not occupy the land. But one of them stood on the upturned furrow and said, false testimony has been borne concerning this soil. God can furnish a table in the wilderness. The man of whom we purchased our peaches told me that he would be pleased to have me observe the way he planted. I then asked him to let me show him how they had and represented in the night vision that had been shown on how to plant. I invited him to visit when these fruits were ripe. He said to me, you need no lesson from me on how to teach or how to plant fruit trees. Our crops were very successful. The peaches were most beautiful in coloring and most delicious in flavor of any that I had tasted. We grew the large yellow Crawford and other varieties, grapes, apricots, nectarines, and plums. The problem is Ellen White never wrote this method down. And so as the years went by, nobody knew how to do it. Well, along comes Len Hoag. Over 50 years ago, he was 13 years old, probably 60 years by now. Prior to this, he'd been raised in India and saw firsthand the necessity of growing food. It sparked a passion in him that continues to this day. After his family returned to the United States, Lynn took advantage of his life-changing opportunity. He took a hands-on garden class taught by Herbert Clarence White. In this case, he was taught the Ellen White method of planting trees by her grandson. This message was given in a revelation in the night vision to Ellen White. Lynn has taught the same method ever since, with some adaptations along the way. It also makes pine trees grow much faster. in this photo, you will see Lynn with 2 trees. Both are planted on the same day. One was on the left is the Ellen White method, and the other is forestry. Yeah, left. The results speak for themselves.
We want to demonstrate a little bit of divine wisdom that God has given to His children at the end of time in these trees. And this is a tree that was planted what we call the Ellen White method. She was given this method in a dream, and I came across this method when I was 13 years old. And every place I've lived from then until now, if I've lived there a year or more, I've planted trees this way. They've all done wonderfully well. This tree is a little over 10 feet tall, and it's just about 3.5 years since we planted them. Now, all of these trees were just 6 inches or so little twigs. These are sequoias, giant sequoia trees. They're little twigs when we planted them. Those that are planted over here are planted the way the forestry department recommends that they be planted. And the tallest of these is this one over here. It's about 4.5 feet tall. So this is about a little over twice the height. But when we look at the size of the trunks and the amount of foliage, we have at least 20 to 1 in mass, the amount of growth. And the same thing will happen with fruit trees, with tomato vines, with grapevines, and other deep-rooted plants if you plant them the same way.
Anyway, there's these formulas, and you can find them on the internet, and I've got links. By the way, the links on today's sheet, if you go to the one on planting the Ellen White method, you'll see the video clip and stuff on that deal. But anyway, so basically there's different layers of things, and over the years there have been a few modifications, like we have a piece of I think it's 3-inch PVC pipe with rocks in the end to capture air, and there's been some little variations, but in general, this grandson of Ellen White knew how she did it, because when she lived at Elmshaven, which is where she lived her final years, he worked for her and he planted fruit trees with her supervision. So he knew exactly how she did it. And then Len Hoeg learned it from him. So here's another chart on the internet that shows the different layers and how it's done. And again, the links are on there, and you can search the internet as well. So on the handout sheet, you have the links to my website with part 22 is planting the Ellen White method, which is what we're doing right now. And this is another method. This is the Back to Eden method. This gentleman lives in the Olympic Peninsula at Sequim on Washington State. And we actually had the opportunity to visit him, and it was amazing. You'd eat his produce and it would just explode in your mouth. It was amazing. Okay, but I'm going to back up so you can hear him tell his story.
When God designed the landscape project for planet Earth, He was so genius, He designed it in such a way He would never have to show up to work. My name is Paul Galchi, and I was raised as a gardener. My parents grew all of our food in Los Angeles as I grew up, and I remember as a 5-year-old kid, my dad on Saturday morning waking us up and saying, well, we got to head off into the to the horse stables and get some horse manure today. So we went down to a rental yard and got a trailer and went to the horse stables and loaded up manure and came home and spread it out in the garden and spaded it in. And as kids, we wore shovels out, spading in heavy clay ground, mixing soil and having a garden. It was wonderful growing up because there's never any time we were hungry. We could go outside and pick fresh vegetables and fruit all the time. And just down in California, there's nothing you couldn't grow. So it was just, we had it all year long. So it was really great. And so as I started to, grow up and I got married and I had some children and I decided, Los Angeles is no longer a place fit for human habitation as far as I was concerned. It was getting really crowded and smoggy and just not safe. And so I thought I want to move to a place where I can continue to do this and grow fresh food for my family, have clean water, clean air. So we came up here to the Olympic Peninsula of Washington. We have a beautiful place. But we built a house and we faced a real challenge. We drilled a well, went 213 feet and got half a gallon a minute. And if you're doing the math and thinking about that, that's not enough water to do a garden. I'll never forget as long as I live. It was August 1979. It was a great year to build a house. It didn't rain all summer, but boy, in August, all this grass was totally dead. The road coming in was all dust. I'm looking at that and saying, God, how am I going to grow fruits without water? And it was so incredible. I hear inside, he says, well, you're looking at the wrong thing. Turn around and look at your trees. And I pushed enough out when I built the house that I knew they had shallow roots. And I says, God, you really have my attention. If you can show me how you do these without irrigation, I can do an orchard. So I went out to the woods of the Fork and I started moving this material underneath the trees, and I was totally amazed. This beautiful, soft, black, damp, incredible compost. When I saw that, I says, well, I can do this. This makes sense. So I started planting the trees out there, and at that time I had straw and sheep manure. Now I'm using wood chips, and it's been amazing. This orchard's been here 31 years now. It's never been watered or fertilized once. It goes through droughts or whatever, and it's just every year it gets better. As I was doing this orchard, experiencing these incredible results, because I was a creature of habit, and because our nature is to do things as we were taught and not to inquire from God, I says, okay, God, thanks for the help, but I can handle this on my own. And so for, I think, probably 17 years, I was out here diligently rototilling, hauling in organic material. You can see a place over here, my major rock pile. This is my altar. This is where all the rocks that came out of my garden over here. And I'm just doing this stuff, and I'm feeling I'm on this treadmill, just running in place, going nowhere, feeling like, how am I going to keep up with this? Every spring, the ground is totally muddy and wet. When I tilled it, it turned to weeds in 5 to 7 days, solid green with weeds. I planted things 3 feet apart so I can rototill with it, do the weeding with the tiller, and it was just labor intensive. And one day I got out my orchard, I don't know what motivated me, I got on my knees and I started moving these wood chips. And I'm down to my elbow in this beautiful black compost. And I got up and started screaming. I was so angry. I said, there's something wrong with this picture. I have been killing myself to get this in my garden. I don't have it. I didn't do anything here. And I hear inside, well, it works in your garden the same way. You didn't ask. I was so angry. I threw that tiller away and I started covering my garden with wood chips. I always say to people, the greatest gift God gave me was that lousy well, because it opened me up to Him and to show me His incredible, work in creation. I've been a gardener for 55 years. I've done tilling, done all that stuff, and it's so amazing now. My only tool is a rake, and it's just so easy and so simple, and the production is so superior to what I ever had. When I saw how easy and simple this was, I says, God, where do we lose it? Why are we doing this? And it was so interesting. It took me right back to Genesis in the beginning. And if you look at in the beginning, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, they had this beautiful, relaxing day in the garden. And every afternoon and evening, God would come down and walk with them through the garden. And I'm sure as He walked through the garden, He would just share with them things that they saw in the garden that day about Himself. Did you notice this? This is my character. This is all about me, kind of thing. And I'm sure they just had this incredible time, totally relaxed, no stress, every day. But when man sinned, the Scripture said things are going to change. And the wording is, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to raise food. Thistles and thorns and weeds are going to compete with you. And the next verse says, and man began to till the soil. You see, man never cultivated in the garden. He tended the garden, but he never disturbed the ground. And when man got disconnected from God, he began to till the soil. Nowhere in nature where man has not been do you ever see exposed dirt. That only happens when man comes and takes the cover. Everywhere in nature where man has not been, it's either covered with needles and leaves or grasses, but the ground is covered. And the reason is because the ground is a living organism. And as all living organisms, such as ourselves, we have skin to protect us. The animals have fur. Fish have scales. Birds have feathers. And the soil is a living organism. And God has designed it and made it so it's always covered with something. And when you take the cover off, it becomes vulnerable and it gets lost. And this is the thing that amazes me about us as intelligent human beings, how we don't see it, because we've been experiencing it for thousands of years in a negative way. We're all around us, all through creation. Everything's just growing beautifully with no work. And we work hard to fail.
Our son is doing this method, and it's working really well. It isn't just chips, but if you go to Back to Eden website, it'll give you details of how they do it. And there's people all over the world that do it. He used to have people coming from all over the world to visit him. But you notice he said he got rid of all his rototiller and everything. The only tool he has is a rake. That's actually also his cane, because he's a victim of Agent Orange and is now ill enough that he doesn't generally accept visitors to come anymore. But so every time you saw him, he had the rake, but he was leaning on it because that was helping him stand up. So here's just a little flyby of some of the different vegetables in his garden. Now he does raise chickens. You might have heard the rooster, and then he throws compost in there. The chickens do their thing, and then he takes that really good compost they make and puts it on his vegetable garden. So that's an addition that he does besides the chips. Anyway, that's pretty neat. So on the website, you'll find videos that we're not covering on how to do other things for the garden. For instance, how to extend your garden growing season by having hoop houses, greenhouses, cold frames. There's a video on how to save seeds when you can't buy or sell. There's video on how to do canning when you can't buy or sell. There's a video on drying food when you can't buy or sell. How to do pantries and cold rooms to store the food, and storing food without electricity. Now we're going to switch to another grid, and that's the one we usually think of when we think, oh, you're off the grid, that means you're not connected to the power grid. So we're going to talk a little bit about the power grid. Wasn't it ironic that yesterday we talked about the 3 ways you could lose power, and then we lost power during supper and didn't get it till breakfast? So just a little hint of what it could be like, and no warning, right? I wanted yesterday to show you this, and somehow we skipped it. This is something else that's a recent wake-up call that we've had.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. I want to update you now on the global computer outage. It's affecting just about everything, from airlines to hospitals.
So many of these companies are containing so much data, and just one little break into a system or one little accident can just take down a cascading effect throughout the entire internet.
So that was like last week. And our son is a dentist in Illinois, and we were talking to him about this because on the news you'd hear about Delta Airlines and all these people 5 days stuck in the airport, they can't get out and all that stuff. But it's not just airlines. Our son's a dentist, and he can't bill any insurance or Medicare or anything like that because that system is affected by this same problem. So his quandary was, do we manually send the bills? Well, then if you manually send the bills for 2 days and then it goes up again, now what? Now which ones did I do and which one didn't I? So they've decided to just not do anything and wait until the thing goes back up again. So it's not just airlines, but it's everything. So now let's talk about solar. The goal here is to look at the grids. We looked at food, and then we say, what's the alternative if you couldn't buy or sell? Well, grow a garden, right? And store the food and all that stuff. So now we're going to look at electrical, and there are various methods where you can generate your own electricity. Solar is one of them. And this, of course, just as the United States map, that's the one I could grab. But the colors on here are how much solar radiation, you might say, is available in that region. So down in the south, the red and the dark, it gets lots and lots of sun. So that's where a lot of these solar farms are. The further north you get, the lighter the color, the less you're going to get. Now, I don't know about Alberta because they get a lot of sun. But it could be cold, but if you still have sun, a lot of the time you could do pretty effectively with solar. If you're in BC, like we are in Washington State, days like this are pretty normal in winter. And that means you're not going to get as much sun. So you need to, if you're going to do solar and you want to be able to literally depend on it, then you need to size your system based on the amount of sunshine you get in your region. And that takes a little research. There are some free online tools on how to do that. Another method besides solar is wind. I have a friend in Texas who has solar and wind. And the problem with wind, there's a couple of problems. One is it's a mechanical device. Solar is not mechanical, it just sits there. There's no moving parts. So it basically will last a long, long time. Wind is different. Wind is moving parts. It's got a generator with blades and all of that. And my friend in Texas has solar and wind. And when he bought the wind setup, the salesman said the nice thing about this brand of a wind generator is if you get a really big wind, it'll shut off so it doesn't destroy the system. They sold lots of them in his area, and then they had a big storm, and the fail-safe did not work. And it ruined all these solar wind devices. So now he's got an 80-foot tower with a wind deal that needs repaired, right? And so how am I going to climb 80 feet and carry this thing that's maybe 300 pounds? No, I got to lower the tower and do the work on the ground. So how am I going to get it down? He says, well, I'll get my tractor and I'll put a cable on it. Now think of physics. So here he is. What happens right now? He can't do it anymore, and the tractor can't keep up, and it crashed on the ground right on the nose, busted everything. So now not only does he have one that didn't work, now it's destroyed. Here's a picture of one destroying in the air during a storm. The other thing about wind generators is they say if you have a wind generator, you're either cursing the wind generator because it's not making enough electricity, or you're cursing it where you live because it's too windy. I went through Ellensburg, Washington, which is where they have wind farms in the middle of our state. And it was so windy that day, I could hardly stand up. I'm thinking, why would anybody want to live in this place? But there's lots of wind farms and they're working good. Okay, another way to make electricity is using water. When we lost the power here last night, the rumor was that at 9 o'clock last night, BC Hydro was going to come. Why do they call it BC Hydro? Because they're making electricity off of hydroelectricity off of dams, right? So that's what hydro is. Well, if you're doing it on your own, it's called micro hydro because they're small. You're not a big power company with a big dam. You're just trying to do it off of a creek. And here's the theory. You have a catch basin up the top of your hill, and then you have a pipe that's could be 2-inch, comes down the hill. The elevation drop is called head, vertical drop. So if you have like a 100-foot drop and you have a 2-inch pipe, you're going to get about 60 pounds per inch at the powerhouse. That's pretty good power. And then it goes through like a fire hose nozzle so that it's shooting really small. And then it goes through a thing here called a Pelton wheel. That's one type. In this case, it's going to have 4 inputs, and it's shooting that water on those little cups on that wheel, and that's spinning around, and that's on a generator, and that makes electricity. So that's the idea, the basics of how micro hydro works. Here's the problems with micro hydro. You got to have a creek. You got to have a creek that drops enough, 100 feet minimum, and you've got to have it running year-round. Then if you have it, you've got to have it where you can legally do that. And many places you can't. Maybe in BC, out in the boondocks, you could, but in Washington, you have to go through lots and lots of regulations. You know, even if one of the agencies said yes, fisheries might say no. And you have to have all of them agree. I read online of some guy when I was researching this, some guy that in Washington, he had for 5 years been going through the process of getting permission to do hydro on his property, and he still hadn't succeeded yet after 5 years. I said, forget it. Yes? Yes, he did. They did. They ran the whole place off of hydro. And I talked to Kathy Smith just last week, And I asked her about that, whether they're still using it. And she thought they were using it, but maybe not completely. They're on the grid as well. But yeah, that's a pretty big system. Pretty big system at Silver Hills. There's another method called geothermal. And like, I don't know if it's Greenland or Iceland or one of those places way up there, but they have volcanic activity, a lot of it, geothermal activity, and they literally generate their own electricity and heat houses from this geothermal heat from in the ground. Now the problem with that, unless you live at Yellowstone, you're probably not going to have geothermal that's going to do you any good. Here's how it works though, and that is the ground down below would be hotter, closer to the core of the earth, than up above. And so you have these coils that can, circulate and pull it out of there. Now here's an example. This isn't making electricity, but this is a place in Nebraska. It gets 20 below zero Fahrenheit in the winter. You can see it's winter there. Greenhouse in the snow. And you may want to jot this down if it interests you. Greenhouse in the snow. This guy was a postal worker and he retired, and for like 20 years he was messing around with this greenhouse that he made, the one in the background. His house is on the right, and he grows tropical plants and exotic fruits and everything year round, 20 below zero, and he doesn't have heat. He uses heat from the ground, and it's 20 below and there's snow on the ground. He dug an 8-foot deep trench. He had like six 6-inch pipes going about 100 feet, and they would go in and out of the greenhouse, and he has an electric fan to circulate it, and it keeps it from freezing when it's 20 below zero. Pretty fascinating. So that's geothermal. That's not making electricity. And then last of all, you could do pedal power. I did a lot of research on this one. There was even an Adventist Junior Academy in Arizona that teamed up with a college, and they got a grant to do research and everything, and they built their own bikes and everything. And after all the research I've done, I've come to the conclusion this isn't going to work. It's going to take way too much energy. You're going to burn up more calories than it's worth to get a few to charge your phone. You're not going to do your house. You might charge your phone. But this one is a really good option, and we have one similar to this. Red Cross has an emergency radio that has all these frequencies like weather and emergency broadcast and all that stuff, AM and FM. And it has a rechargeable battery, but it also has a hand crank. So if it was an emergency and your battery was dead because you forgot to charge it, you could at least crank it and make enough electricity to run the radio, which doesn't take much electricity. American Red Cross. So which alternative power choice is the best based on what we've talked about? Any ideas? Huh? Solar. And people will say in BC and in Washington, and they'll say, oh, well, you don't get enough sunshine to do solar. Do you know that in Germany, which has very similar weather, they have solar panels all over the place. They're along the what do you call it, the Autobahn and everything. And it's proven that you can generate enough electricity in this kind of weather. The only exception would be the very, very deep, dark couple of days in winter when it's heavy overcast and it's multiple days. Then you might have to run a generator or just conserve. But solar is a really good way to go. And our son-in-law is an electrical engineer, and he's really into solar. And his opinion is solar is cheap enough. Just buy more solar to compensate for those dark days in the winter. Okay. The next one is water. And this is the old-fashioned well with a bucket on the end of a rope, hand-dug well. Here's the modern kind of a well. You have a casing that goes down in the ground to the water table, and pipes and all that, and pressure tanks. And, down below there's a layer, aquifer, that's got water in it. Then you can also do a spring. If you happen to be on property that has a spring, you can develop the spring. And if it's uphill from you, it could be gravity feed. I know people that have a spring that is their source of water, and because it's up on a hill, it's gravity feed. They don't need any pumps or anything. But anyway, that's one option, is to do a spring. Another is rain harvesting. That's taking the water off your roof. There are some geographic areas in North America that it's illegal to do that, imagine. There's other ones where they'll give you money to do it. So, you know, if you want to do it, you want to be legal, you should check about where you live. But basically, rain harvesting is a way to go. In our case, we do rain harvesting because we're not able to drill a well. And so we did rain harvesting. We get water off our house and our shop and the tank shed and gather it in the spring. And then we have enough water usually to get us through the summer and everything like that. So rain harvesting is pretty interesting. It's more expensive to set up than a well. But if you can't do the well, or your well might be bad, one thing about here, you're always going to get enough rain. And then there's surface water. If you have a creek or even a pond or something like that, that's an option for water. The thing that you'd have to consider is filtering of it. But now this is pretty cool. This doesn't have to do with drinking water necessarily, but this is called a ram pump. Have any of you heard of this? Any farmers? Way back in the day, farmers used these to pump water from a creek into their cattle troughs, and then they wouldn't even have to go out and get the water for the cattle because it did it automatic. These have no electrical parts. It's moving parts, but they'll last for like 50 years. And the way it works is you've got a pipe coming down the hill, say a 2-inch pipe. In this case, it's not a 2-inch, might be a 1-inch, coming down the hill. And then the ram, what happens is it takes 90% of that water pressure to run the pump. So you're wasting 90% of the water and you're getting 90%. Well, that 90% can now on its own be pumped higher than even where the water came from. It's really, really fascinating how well it will work. Okay, but then no matter what water source you have to have to do some filtering. In Arizona, we even had to filter the city water. It was horrible. But you can get water filters like you would use for camping. You can get some, or they like you have a Brita pitcher, Brita filter. You put the water in, and then when you pour it out, it's filtered. There's different ways to do it. In our situation, we have 3 canisters on the wall that the water goes through, gets finer, and then it goes through an ultraviolet to make sure any bugs are killed, and so our water's perfect by the time we have got it off the roof. Okay, now let's talk about heat. I'm just going to show you, yeah, please. Oh yeah, yeah. Now we're fortunate we don't live on the beach where you'd have seagulls sitting on your roof. That's another issue. We've been very blessed that we have no birds sitting on our roofs ever. So that's not an issue, but you know, it'll get dusty and stuff, but it's good water, and we have metal roofs for that purpose. So we'll talk about heat. I'm just going to show you the kinds of normal heat. This is a heat pump. Remember the idea of geothermal, taking the heat, exchanging it. A heat pump works the same way, but in this case, it's pulling it out of the air. These are very common for electric. And these are the new versions of them. They're called split systems. And these are, you'll see them on the sides of buildings. Same idea. It's a heat exchanger taking the warmth out of the air. It could even be near freezing, and well, not too cold, but it could pull what you don't think is heat out of the air and then kick out the cold, and then it exchanges it into the house. A heat pump, by the time it gets really cold, it doesn't work anymore. Then you have to run electric heat. So here's the idea again of how a heat pump works. It's got pipes that go underground that grab the warmer air from in the soil, because underground, at least around here, probably at about the 8-foot level, the ground is the same temperature year round. So in the summer, this gives you air conditioning. In the winter, it gives you heat. Okay, it's still running on electricity, but it's supplementing it, making it more efficient by this process. And then my favorite, heating with wood. This is a Blaze King style, freestanding, not up against the wall heater, and they work really good. We had one in one of our previous country homes, and it really worked good, and we could run them all night. The next country home we built we made it a little fancier and we put a fireplace insert into a nice looking fireplace looking unit. Doesn't work very good because that heat is stuck back in that hole. This is the way to go here. This is a friend of ours. They decided they better be more sustainable, so they moved their piano out of their living room and they bought this Amish-made kitchen wood-burning stove for emergencies. And this one, you can cook on it, you can bake and so forth, and heat the house. The firebox is on the left so you can see the fire. This is another Amish-made cook stove. This one is bigger. You can put almost 21-inch logs in it, and it's big enough to heat the whole house. You can bake, you can cook. There's a bread warmer on the top. You can, on the far side is a 15-gallon water reservoir, so you can have hot water. And then it also has pipes that you can run to a big tank, like a hot water tank that could automatically give you hot water. So now let's talk about the medical grid. The medical grid, like I said yesterday, what if you're on a dialysis machine and the grid goes down for good? You're in trouble. You're not going to make it. That's why the government says if the grid goes down for good, within 6 months, 90% will be dead. Because many of us will need life-saving things, whether it's medication or safe drinking water or whatever. So when you're looking at how can I prepare for if I can't buy my medications, for instance, I'm type 2 diabetic. There's a plant in the Philippines called the help me, Kathy. Insulin plant, thank you. It's called the insulin plant. And we have a friend that's from the Philippines, and she brought one, and I'm hoping to get one of those and put it in the greenhouse. There's also a plant that they make a medication, alternative, what do you call it, a supplement, medical supplement that's called berberine. And it's made from a plant. And it might be made from the insulin plant. I haven't been able to figure that out. But the point is, if you analyze your own personal health needs, if you couldn't get to a pharmacy or a doctor, what areas would you be in trouble, and what might there be alternatives to help you have some things in the background? And so it'd be worth doing some research for your own particular situation. Now, some things that work in general as compared to diabetic or whatever is hydrotherapy. And when Ellen White was alive and the Adventist Church was starting up, the sanitarium at Battle Creek was huge. Have you ever seen a picture of how big that place was? It was world class. People from all over the world came to that sanitarium, and they did a lot of hydrotherapy. And we don't even do that anymore since the medical community has switched to popping pills. This kind of approach hasn't worked. We have a whole section on the website on various kinds of hydrotherapy, and this is from the website. And so if that interests you, the basic principle is hot and cold. You get in the shower, and when you're done, you make it as hot as you can stand it for like 30 seconds, and then you make it as cold as you can stand it for 30 seconds. Do that a couple times and get out.
Is that kind of the same as a dry sauna and turning it to a cold plunge?
The question is, would it be the same as a dry sauna? I would say so, but that's going to take a while to get your core hot, and then you'd want to get into cold right away. And so if you had a sauna and you were hot, if you were done and you hopped into the cold shower, I would say that would be the same. The hydrotherapy, there are ways of focusing on your feet or on your heart or different parts. There's different methods depending on what you're trying to do. We had 8 videos by this family here that Andrew is the one laying on the bed being the guinea pig. He's a master's in biology. He teaches for Andrews at a distance. His wife Becky is a doctor in physical therapy, and they're the ones doing this. And Andrew did a 8-part part on using natural remedies to help with cancer. Just 2 weeks ago, our 3rd one got canceled by YouTube. So they don't like that. The algorithms are spying on us, and they throw out stuff that's not following the narrative. Fortunately, I have backups, and we're putting them on Rumble, which is a Canadian company that doesn't kick you out. So when you go to the website, you'll be able to still click on them, but they're going to take you to Rumble instead of YouTube. So anyway, hydrotherapy is one option for taking care of your medical needs, and there are a wide variety of things that hydrotherapy claims to be able to help cure. One of the videos that we had taken down that either is going to be up or is up again on Rumble was using hydrotherapy to help with cancer. We have some dear friends who he's been battling real serious cancer for quite a long time. And so another one of our friends went to Weimar for treatments for cancer, and they put him in a really hot tub, and then they stuck him in cold and did the hydrotherapy thing. So my son-in-law, an electrical engineer, he went over to our friend's house and he hot wired the hot tub to go hotter than it's made to go. So he got in the hot tub and just cooked himself as hot as he could get, and then he'd hop in the cold shower, and it really, really helped his cancer. He couldn't tell his doctor what he did, but it did help. So that's one of the videos that YouTube didn't like, but it'll be back up. So anyway, okay, now the next thing is there are wild and edible plants, medicinal plants. There are lots of them. And in an area like this, with all this foliage, they're everywhere. And so that's something, we've got a whole big section on our website of all the individual plants that have medicinal and edible, either way, situations. Andrew Rice did those, and he does a really good job. So if you want to get research on that, so again, we're looking at the medical, your health. And so even though you could research individual things for you, like me for type 2 diabetes, you could all learn about the benefits of hydrotherapy, because it can be for a multitude of your problems, and same with these medicinal plants. Like this tent here, this lady's awesome. Our grandkids are in there, and she's helping them make mosquito bite, what do you call it? Repellent. And she's got all these different essential oils of plants, and put them in there, and they've got if you see a little purple bottle running around, that's what it is. And so, that's using some of this stuff for that. And there's another plant, I think it's plantain. If you get bit or a bee sting, you put that on there and it goes away right away. And plantain is everywhere. It's in the grass and everything. So I'm not a pro on that, but there's lots of videos on our website, mostly by Andrew and Becky, on this subject. Another grid that is money is a financial grid. So, we saw that just a couple of weeks ago with this computer thing that went down. The Microsoft didn't match with this company's update, and it crashed the airlines and crashed our son's ability to do billing and everything. What if the bank system goes down completely? And it really could, and it could be on purpose. There have been places where the banks closed somewhere in the world. The banks closed, and the people couldn't get their money out. I've speculated, some of my friends have speculated, if they were going to do that on purpose, like let's say, we all hear about the American dollar is going to crash, right? Because it's the world's monetary that everything's built on, but it's losing to the Chinese. And if the American dollar is no longer the standard, then what could happen is all of a sudden your money is worth nothing unless you trade it in. Now think about what we know about the mark of the beast. Okay, what if they go to digital currency? Your paper money is no good as of tomorrow. They're not going to tell you in advance, or everybody will rush and go get the banks, right? So it would just happen without warning. And now the only way you're going to use it is if you dig that money out of your mattress and take it to and exchange it for digital currency. Okay. Anyway, the point is the financial grid could be a really without warning problem that could really, really affect you. So what do people do? I don't have any great advice, but a lot of people buy gold coins or silver coins. In this case, they have the United States written on them, but you could do loonies and toonies, but they're like our money and they don't have any value except what someone thinks it's worth. These are actually worth their weight in gold, so to speak. The problem I have with this is, and I'm not saying don't buy gold or silver. I mean, we've got a little bit, but what if you've got a gold coin and now you're bartering and your neighbor wants to sell you a loaf of bread and you've got a gold coin? What are you going to do? Take a knife and shave some gold off? You know, it's maybe worth $300 and he's got a dollar's worth of, you know, so the coins sound good, but you know, it may ward off the thing of your paper money going away, but it's not going to be a solution for everything. This is going to be the solution. Bartering, trading. Oh, you got a loaf of bread? Well, I've got radishes. You want to trade? You know, you don't need money. Way back, they didn't have money, right?
I feel like that would be
What?
I feel like that would be so great.
Wouldn't that be great? It depends on where you live, because if what you need isn't where you live, you know, I want to have a peach and it's the middle of winter, I can get a peach, but it's coming from Peru or someplace, you know, and when you're down to that bartering stage, you're talking about you and your neighborhood and whatever's available right then. That's the trade-off. The Bible says, as we know, Revelation 13, and he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and or notice it's or, that's interesting, in their foreheads. By the way, like I said, I've been doing country living seminars for 10 years, and when I first did it, I blew over this and didn't notice who receives a mark in what hand? Why not left hand? Why not both? Any hand? You know, it's got to be significant. Huh? It's the working hand if you're right-handed. Or in their foreheads. So here's my theory, because at the time, if you watch the number one on the videos on the website, that's my very first seminar 10 years ago, and I got to this verse and I said, I don't know what the significance is. If anybody has an idea, I'd love to hear it. In the meantime, I think I know the answer. We're talking about the mark of the beast, right? No man can buy or sell. You're making your eternal decision. Am I going to accept the mark of the beast or am I not? Correct? That's the context. What would be the difference between the hand and the forehead?
One's working, one's deciding.
Yeah, one's working and one's deciding. So let's say, think back at COVID. Okay, let's say you were working and you had to choose whether you were going to get vaxxed or not. And there were people that got vaxxed because they believed it. It's the right thing to do. I trust it. There's others that didn't do it. They didn't do it. But then there was a middle group of people who did it that didn't want to do it, right? But if they didn't take the vax, they'd lose their job, right? So there's three groups of people that I think fit here, just like it did the vaccine. If you believed you should get the vaccine, it's the forehead. If you didn't believe it, but you did it because you needed to eat, that's the hand, that's the working hand. And if you didn't do it at all, it's because you didn't believe it and you're willing to sacrifice eating because you didn't want to do it. And I believe that's exactly what this is talking about. When it's the mark of the beast, there will be people who will take the mark because they think it's the right thing to do, and there's people that will take it because they don't want to compromise. They will fold to the narrative. And those who are faithful, who won't take the mark, are sealed. That's the other. Does that make sense? So I personally think that's the answer. And the right hand, I think you're right. That's the working hand. Country living. Again and again, the Lord's instructed our people to take their families away from the cities into the country where they can raise their own provisions. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. We should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. By the way, tomorrow is a really interesting study. And this was something I didn't understand to begin with. You will have people that will quote Ellen White and say, I don't need to move in the country. My bread and water will be sure. I don't need to move in the country because, and they'll quote an Ellen White quote, and I'll show it to you tomorrow, that'll say, there will come a time when we need to move out of the large cities into the smaller cities, preparatory to move into the country. Remember that one? How's that different than this? That's not the same at all. This is saying get out of Dodge. The other is saying you don't have to get out of Dodge. And so tomorrow we're going to figure out why. It's really interesting. Okay, we should now begin to heed the instruction given us over and over again. Okay, on the website, I have a whole section called Grid Down. We did a country living camp meeting about a month ago, second year. And in preparation for those who are making presentations like the one I showed the picture of the hydrotherapy in the log house, they said, we've never done this before, so we want to practice. So 4 or 5 of us families got together, and like once a month, and they would come prepared to do these demonstrations. And I videotaped them, and they're on the website. Well, that's in the Grid Down section, and now we've done the country living camp meetings, and we videoed all those as well. But Grid Down, because so many of these things had to do with what happens if you don't have the grid, we made the section called Grid Down. One of the fun things we did when we were doing those practice runs is one of the groups said, "Okay, I've got an exercise we're going to do, and I've not prepared for this. I just thought of it. Let's all go to our cars." There were 5 cars. So we went out to the cars and she said, "Okay, here's the scenario. We just had an EMP, the grid's down, you're 30 miles from home. What do you have in your car right now that's going to help you get home?" Because your car won't start because it's an EMP deal. And it was really fun because one car didn't have anything. She just bought the car. One was super prepared. And I was kind of in the middle, thanks to Kathy having anything in the car. But 30 miles is quite a ways to go. You're not going to get there in one day, usually. So you got to think about overnight. You got to think about water. You got to think about food. What am I going to wear? What if it rains? Where am I going to sleep? And so anyway, that was pretty cool. But anyway, that's one of the videos in the Grid Down section. Now the handout for today, if you didn't already take it yesterday, addresses the things we've talked about and some more in that same category. So what does it mean to be off grid? How big a garden should I have when you can't buy or sell? Garden amendments, that means the extra things you put in the soil when you can't buy or sell. Saving seeds when you can't buy or sell. Planting the Ellen White method, that's the video that you couldn't hear. Natural methods for pest control and disease management. Remember, you can't go buy all those amendments. Extending the gardening season. Cold frames, hoop houses, and greenhouses. Preserving food by canning when you can't buy or sell. Emergency and long-term food storage. Drying food when you can't buy or sell. Gardening with grow boxes and raised beds. Pantries and cold rooms. Storing food without electricity. Gardening without commercial amendments. And then the grid. Understanding solar power systems. Solar power system tour. In this video, we go and we actually look at 4 or 5 existing solar systems, from one in an RV to a big one on a house. What could make the grid go down? Surviving a winter power outage, and comparing faith and works to a solar power system. That's kind of a neat one. Medical grid, understanding fever treatments and boosting your immune system. Medical freedom. Whoops, sorry, I got to quit doing this. Making an herbal tincture. Backcountry medical aid. This is a doctor and a nurse that do emergency rescues in the mountains, and they did a demonstration of how to be prepared for that. God's Marvelous Medicine Cabinet, that was actually here at Hope during the Health Share event. And if you've never been to Health Share, it's really fun. We enjoyed it a lot.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.